I'm Brandy Ball from Indian Electric Cooperative in Cleveland, Oklahoma. Welcome to Along Those Lines.
Support for this podcast comes from Champion Fiberglass. Champion Fiberglass is committed to America's electric cooperatives by providing strong, durable, American-made fiberglass electrical conduit manufactured in their triple ISO certified facility in Spring, Texas.
Hi, everyone. This is a podcast about electric cooperatives, the work they do, and the challenges they face. I'm your host, Scott Hoffman. Cybersecurity incidents involving the systems and data managed by third-party vendors are on the rise for utilities in the U.S. A 2024 analysis by KPMG found that nearly half of the cyber breaches in the energy sector come from third-party platforms. It's a worrying trend that has directly impacted electric cooperatives, and industry cyber professionals are working hard to counteract it. To talk about what co-ops are seeing and what they're doing to enhance security and mitigate this threat, we'll talk to Carter Manucy, NRECA's Director of Cybersecurity. Later, we'll hear from Tanner Greer, Senior Vice President and Chief Technology Officer at North Carolina's Blue Ridge Energy, about how they responded and recovered from a third-party cyber incident in late 2023. Carter, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, Scott. Thanks. Glad to be back again.
All right, so why don't we start with the simple definition of what it is we're talking about today? What do we mean when we say third-party cyber vulnerabilities?
When we talk about that, what we're really talking about is a weakness in your cybersecurity posture. And it comes from maybe not your own technology or personnel, but from a company you're doing business with, somebody you've entrusted with access to your systems or data. Maybe it's a cloud storage provider, email, maybe it's customer service, billing platform. It may be somebody that's monitoring endpoints for you through like a managed service provider. It could be somebody that's doing firewall help for you or security operations centers. It may be somebody that's handling your engineering design tools, DER management platforms, outage management software. And it could also be your SCADA vendor. But here's kind of the kicker with that. A lot of the third party, when they come in, they also have privileged access to your systems and sometimes even more access than your own employees have to the systems. So if they're compromised, then sometimes their access becomes your exposure. So even if you're doing a great job of patching your internal systems and you're segmenting, you're monitoring, all the things that we talk about in cybersecurity, if you're doing a great job, a breach from a vendor's network could actually still give you vulnerabilities and attack paths that you may not be prepared for. So when we talk about third-party vulnerabilities, we're not pointing fingers. We're identifying a key area where trust and security has to be balanced, right? And keep in mind that it's not just a network connection, a purely cybersecurity play here. It could also be the data that a vendor might have about you or your members. So, we have to think about these things very broadly. And I guess one other thing that I want to make sure that we keep in mind as we talk through this subject is that there's a term that I like to use called assume breach. If you treat every vendor like they might be compromised, you'll make better, smarter decisions now that'll save you pain later on in the future. So this kind of idea extends to your own cybersecurity controls, but maybe that's a topic for another day.
Maybe you can give us a scenario to sort of hit home what this looks like in real time. Can you give us a hypothetical or a real scenario of how this vulnerability would occur and what it looks like from the co-op side?
Yeah, we have a couple examples, unfortunately, real ones that we can talk through. One is a industry one that's well known, and the other is a co-op specific one that may not be as known that I'll share. The first one is the SolarWinds breach that happened, and it was one of the most seriously and widely impactful third-party cybersecurity events that have happened in probably the past decade. SolarWinds is a trusted IT infrastructure management vendor. They have a software product called Orion that is used globally to monitor and manage networks, including a lot of utilities and sometimes even in the operational technology or OT systems as well. Back in 2020, some attackers, believed to be from a nation state, compromised SolarWinds' internal development environment. They actually were able to get in there and insert code into the software updates that were used by the SolarWinds Orion product. So these updates were signed by the vendor and they were distributed out to thousands of customers, including U.S. government agencies, large enterprises, utilities. And for months, these attackers actually had privileged access into these environments because they'd come through the front door, basically, that trusted update that you had gotten from a vendor. And even if you did all the right things on checking to make sure that the signatures are right and this is an authorized patch and all those things, everything would have checked out. And what you installed, you would have believed to be 100% correct. And so this wasn't just malware from a sketchy website. It was malware designed and disguised as a routine patch from this highly trusted vendor. So that's the danger when we talk about these third-party cyber risks. That even with strong internal practices, the breach that a vendor could have is really a pathway into your network, as I mentioned. And, a lot of utilities were actually affected by this. And we saw follow-on attacks where folks used this initial access to explore systems, extract data, and in some cases actually manipulate infrastructure. Believe me, I spent a lot of hours trying to make sure that utility I was at previously wasn't compromised. And I know a lot of other folks have the similar scars on trying to dig through that. So this is a great example of a third-party breach where your trust relationship is really broken down. But I'll give you another example, maybe one that hits a little closer to home. I got a call one day from some trusted partners encouraging me to take a look at some data that they had seen. These partners I'm speaking of work for very large organizations that monitor major points on the internet for malicious behaviors, normally correlated with things that we see that are known being exploited on the internet. So when you get a tap from folks like this, you pay attention. And this particular data that I was pointed to was pointing at one of our members. And a small one at that, a small co-op. And it was showing signs of compromise from a recent firewall vulnerability that had been published. Long story short, it turned out that it wasn't really the co-op, but their ISP that was providing services that was compromised. And that ISP had no idea that this was going on. They hadn't patched this particular firewall, and the monitoring software that they were using showed no signs that anything was wrong. A bit of convincing and showing specifically what to look for led them to actually jump on it and actually begin their remediation of that. And it was caught soon enough that the threat actor hadn't had real time to start digging in and getting data out of the system and everything else. But that was all very fortunate, right? It was a very fortunate circumstance that had happened. And if I hadn't had the relationship with that organization and the co-op, I don't know that it would have had such a positive outcome. And unfortunately, in the world of cybersecurity, we're often filled with stories just like this. Even the story of SolarWinds was similarly discovered by a human who just happened to stop and think twice. It wasn't really fancy tools. I don't want folks to get the wrong idea that tools aren't good because they're great, but they're only part of a solution. And that's why I also talk about that term, assume breach, whenever you go into this.
Can you give us the gamut of what the risks are for a co-op when one of their vendors, it could be, like you said, it could be someone who's a third-party vendor for operational tools or for customer service. Can you give us a sense of what the risks are across the board for a co-op when something like this happens?
It'll run across the entire technology stack that a lot of folks will deal with, both, as you mentioned, in the information technology, IT, and operational technology or OT space. On the IT side, you might think about your customer information systems, CIS, that handle your member account and billing stuff. Maybe document management or cloud storage like SharePoint or Google Drive or one of those types of things. Email services like Microsoft 365, Google Workspace. The other component to that is your endpoint monitoring or anti-malware, antivirus software that could be in the same vein. You can also have payroll, HR, benefit software that also gets caught up in this that handles employee data. On the OT side or the operational technology side, SCADA systems, right, are vendors that supply software for control systems or monitoring your control systems. Metering platforms like AMI headends or analytic dashboards. Your load management systems that may be tied to demand response or DER integrations, and maybe vendor-created relay protection systems and settings and firmware updates you might pull from relay manufacturers. And in cybersecurity, a lot of co-ops are outsourcing a lot of these parts of their defense, right? So the MSSP or managed service providers that provide detection and response for you, your firewall or intrusion detection systems are sometimes managed by third parties, and your cloud-hosted security event management software, Dell SecureWorks and others are in that same vein, where they're actually analyzing your logs and looking at things on your behalf. So if any of these vendors are breached, your systems can actually provide pivot points back into your environment, and that's what we have to be careful of.
Carter, would you say that this is a trend? Is this something that you're seeing is not only a big problem, but it's a problem that's getting bigger?
For sure. I think there's two main drivers behind what's happening and why folks are targeting these types of systems. Number one is a growing reliance on digital systems, right? So as we modernize, we're adopting new cloud platforms, we're integrating renewables, we're digitizing our substations. So the number of vendor interfaces is just increasing. And each one of these really expands your attack surface. And the more tools and providers you bring into your environment, the more opportunities there are for attackers to find and exploit these vulnerabilities. But number two, and perhaps more importantly, is the vendors are a real attractive target, because why would I, as an attacker, want to try to attack 100 secure utilities when you can just hit one weak vendor and get access to all of them? Is exactly what happened in the SolarWinds event. They were able to infiltrate systems that were very secure by getting around a lot of this. So this is kind of a force multiplier for attackers, particularly nation state actors and sophisticated ransomware groups. They target these weak links in your supply chain to reach those stronger, better defended targets downstream. And co-ops just happen to be that attractive target because, you manage both sensitive systems and digital and critical infrastructure. And I guess one last thought on that is that we're always trying to do more with less. We're all stressed thin. We're often distracted, constantly bombarded by alerts, policy shifts, changes in the weather. So don't think for a minute that the adversaries aren't aware of this as well, and they're trying to use it to their advantage at every chance that they get.
So I know you guys provide a lot of tools and services to co-ops to sort of that go across the spectrum of cybersecurity. Are there things that you're doing with respect to this particular issue, to third-party vendor systems, that are intended to help them beef up their security?
Yeah, for sure. And keep in mind that you're not in this alone, right? Because NRECA is really looking to provide all of those tools that we can certainly help and do for you. But the number one thing is our Cyber Goals program. If you're not familiar with the Cyber Goals program, I suggest pushing pause right now, going to cooperative.com, search for Cyber Goals program. You'll find it and you can sign up there. Find your IT person, walk through it, figure out what applies to you and how you can actually perform those functions. There's a lot of good information in there. But specifically, Cyber Goal number 3 focuses on reviewing your vendor contracts. A lot of the other goals that are there also address a lot of the other components of cybersecurity, but specifically when we're talking about third-party risk, that's one of them there. These goals are really designed to be adaptable to your co-op size as well. So keep that in mind that, as they're written, these are a lot of suggestions on how you might be able to actually accomplish these things. We also have our Threat Analysis Center, or TAC. We're developing ways to reduce alert fatigue, because if you can imagine, you've got all these vendors, they're all having issues, or the equipment that you have is having issues. How do you keep track of that? And that's one of the main things Attack does, is it focuses on alert fatigue and allows you to filter down on the things that are really important in your environment. So that enables your co-ops also to have a secure place to have conversations in this platform where you can actually bounce ideas and get some help from other members in co-ops as well. We also recommend tabletop exercises. So there's a number of ways that we do that, including at our upcoming CyberTech conference. Co-op CyberTech is coming June 24th through 26th in Denver. So if you've got folks in your IT or OT staff that, they've got cybersecurity in their responsibilities or they're curious, this is a great place to either learn or hone those skills. We have tactical workshops, threat briefings, peer-to-peer panels, vendor engagements, hands-on activities for understanding how these actual tools can be applied and really dealing with a lot of these issues that we're talking about.
Well, Carter, I love what you said earlier about how you're not alone in this. And I love how you calm it down and you simplify things and make it seem, less daunting. So thanks, as always, for coming on and getting us up to speed, and good luck facing this latest challenge.
Appreciate it. We're always here. Just reach out to help.
Thanks, Carter. Let's pause here for a word from our sponsor, and when we come back, we'll talk to a leader at a North Carolina co-op that recently went through a third-party breach.
Along those lines is made possible by American-made Champion Fiberglass. Fiberglass conduit is a lightweight, strong alternative to traditional conduit materials. It offers no burn-through, fault resistance, ease of installation, and lower materials and installation costs. Plus, durability and corrosion resistance help contribute to lower total cost of ownership for America's electric cooperatives.
I'm Allison Young from Kauai Island Utility Cooperative on that lovely island of Kauai. You're listening to Along Those Lines.
Welcome back. The staff at Blue Ridge Energy in North Carolina know firsthand what a third-party breach looks like after a vendor's system was compromised by ransomware in the fall of 2023. To talk about the measures they took to respond and recover, we have Tanner Greer, Blue Ridge's Senior Vice President and Chief Technology Officer. Tanner, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, why don't you start us off with a description of Blue Ridge Energy? How many meters you got, number of employees, territory, stuff like that.
Sure. So Blue Ridge Energy is about a 80,000 meter co-op. We're located in Northwest North Carolina. We serve 4 main counties, but 7 total counties. We serve just a little sliver of a few. I like to tell people that we're in the area that touches Virginia, Tennessee, and North Carolina. So right up there in the corner. A really pretty area, pretty mountainous. Obviously not Rockies level, but a really pretty area to be in for sure. Employee-wise, we're somewhere around the 170, a little over 170 mark. Employees. We do have a subsidiary, actually 2. One that does propane and fuels. It has about 50 employees in addition. And then we have another subsidiary that does fiber that we just use co-op employees for.
Okay, so we're talking about this third-party breach that occurred. Walk us through what happened on that first day. This was an attack that involved one of your vendors with whom you shared data. Tell us what happened.
We initially got a notification from our vendor. Everyone has seen these notifications, but they said something along the lines of, we've had an incident. Out of abundance of caution, we're going to basically isolate ourselves and we'll continue to let you know more. And they gave us some recommendations as well, some things that they recommended that we do to be sure that we wouldn't be impacted by their incident from a kind of a direct impact. Now, you were right. We do share data with them from time to time, and seems like our vendors now more and more are working with our data quite often. But at first, initially, we really didn't know, we had any issue, I guess. We just assumed they had an incident and that we needed to kind of turn everything off. And after that, we would learn more. But we just assumed that it didn't affect us currently.
And this was in late September of 2023, right?
It was, yes.
Okay. So the first initial email comes, you shut off your connection to the vendor. What happens in the ensuing few days?
So we were continued to receive updates from them. As we went further along, they started to really unpack how affected they were. Cyber attacks, it's tough to know everything right away. You're kind of like stop the bleeding first and then figure out what's impacted. And as they looked and learned more about how they were impacted, they continued to alert us and they started letting us know that there was some data being exfiltrated. At that time, we didn't know that our data was part of that. We just still assumed it was corporate data that they had. But then we got an email from a cybersecurity vendor in the co-op space, and that changed our perspective and kicked off our response to this process.
Yeah, that set off a really, really interesting series of events. This third-party cyber vendor, is this common in the industry for folks to scour the dark web and say, hey, we found your stuff, or was this sort of completely out of the blue for you?
For us, it was out of the blue. I'm hoping that means that we haven't had any other incidents in the past, right? But for us, it was the first time. At first, we were kind of almost skeptical, didn't know if this was the same people. But after we did some research, figured out, it was legitimate. We started looking around and they actually sent us some sample files of email addresses, things like that, enough that we could determine that what was out there publicly did include some of the data files from our servers.
Are you familiar enough with what the dark web is and how it works to just give us a little primer on why this is a place where stolen data and things like that end up?
I'll do my best. So the dark web, in a nutshell, is basically the internet that's not available to us on Google. There's a long list of servers that are hosted by different people all around the world, mostly nefarious in nature, just because if they're not nefarious, typically you do see them on a Google search, when you're looking around, but they're not indexed. And unfortunately, they're some of the worst parts of the human society. It could be data like this, stolen data, trafficked credit cards, all kinds of things that the average person really isn't going to be interested in or aware of. But it's where these groups kind of organize and sell data back and forth, as well as vulnerabilities. And then, of course, there's even worse things than that. But yeah, basically, you can't access it without kind of knowing where it is. Where it was hosted was actually on the responsible groups page. So I guess as they compromise, and there were other companies' data out there as well. But as they compromise companies, they kind of host it on their site to, I guess, one, prove that they have your data so that they can then leverage you for ransom. And then I guess if that doesn't work, potentially either sell it to another entity that wants to attack you directly or just has any other interest in the data.
What you guys did next is just fascinating to me. Walk us through steps you took to ascertain that it was true and then do what you could to correct it.
Sure. So once we realized that the email was legitimate from the cyber vendor, we decided that at that point we had to really take things into our own hands. We knew that like some amount of our data was out there. We didn't know how much. So we tried strategizing around how we would do that because we didn't want to access things on the dark web from company assets and things like that. So we actually pulled some old machines out that had previously been retired, and we got a LTE modem and that wasn't connected to anything else inside. And we went to the location that the vendor had sent us in the email to the address, and there we found a data dump from this breach. So we downloaded that. It took a long time just because the cell connection was so slow. But it took overnight, and we got in the next morning and we were able to start looking through the data. Now, initially we involved very little people because, and that's one of the things I mentioned when I presented on this, but you really don't want to be an alarmist. So trying to only allow the people to know that need to know at the time. But then, as you know, I mean, you also want to be transparent too. We started looking at the data and we kept it pretty small, just a group of us in IT working with other executives at the co-op and the CEO. And we started diving through the data. We started recognizing directories and things like that. We knew that it was a copy of some data that it came from one of our CIS servers and FIS servers. And we knew that the data was real at that point. So basically, it was almost like, I know it sounds crazy, but it was line by line. We did use some software tools to help us make it a little more efficient, but we started analyzing emails we had found, files, and through that, we ascertained that we had PII plus data for employees and some for members. And so we would just constantly go back and report that. And as we found a little bit more, we would report a little bit more until we felt like we had a good handle on all the records that were out there.
So how long from the time of that first notification from the vendor to the time that you start telling your employees and talking to your members about what's going on?
So we tried to do a staged approach. Again, as we knew a little bit more, we shared more, but we didn't want to share anything that we weren't entirely sure about. So probably a few days, initial days, we spent looking through data, and it was very tedious. It's amazing. The little files here and there, they add up, and you have to look through every one because you're not sure which one has something, which one doesn't. Few days, we were pretty aware that we knew that we would have at least some member impact and some employee impact. So we actually went ahead and let employees know at that time that there was going to be impact. We're going to tell them as much as we could, as fast as we could. And then we spent a few more days until we felt like we had a handle on all the employee impact. And then we shared even more with them. And we even did a little town hall one morning with all employees. Once we knew the scope of the entire breach and exactly who was impacted, we let them ask all of us as senior leaders and also our CEO any questions they wanted to ask. So we had 225 people or so there, and there were some hard questions for sure. Even though it happened from another vendor, there's still a responsibility for your data, and we learned that through the process. One thing we learned more than anything is that your data is your responsibility, even if it exists at a vendor or a cloud service or something like that. And so you're ultimately responsible for how someone else maybe handles your data.
So the co-op response, was there a claim against your cyber insurance? Did you notify law enforcement? Did you arrange for credit reporting for all your employees and some members?
We pretty much immediately opened a claim probably in those first 3 days once we realized that we did have, in fact, personally identifiable information as part of this breach. So we worked with them. For us, that was Federated, which many co-ops use, and they have a cyber provider that they underwrite a lot of their policies through. So we really pretty much got handed off to them right away. They assigned us legal counsel, and they started helping us walk through the process. So they were asking many of the same questions you're asking. How many records do we think it is? Who is impacted? What states? There's a lot of things you really have to keep track of because different states have different reporting requirements. Some an email is enough. Some you have to send a certified letter. But the one good thing is the legal team they assigned us knew all about that. They had templates in place. Unfortunately, this is not a rare occurrence to have a data breach anymore. And they had templates in place and they were able to provide those to us. As far as credit monitoring is concerned, that was something we did offer. We offered credit monitoring to any members and any employees that were infected. Just it's public data at this point. One of the requirements that you have to do is you have to report it typically to your state's attorney general's office, how many records you've out there. So we had a little bit shy of 500 records. Most of those were employee records and employee dependent records. And then the rest of those were member records. And it was really all the things you would think about. Mainly Social Security was a big part of that. And we reported to some members and some employees, even things that weren't required to be reported. And that was something that was strange to us, is there's a lot of things that are not required to be reported. Things that you think are important. And as co-ops, we're very community focused and community facing. You care for our members. So there was a couple things that we did not have to share with them that we did because we just felt it was the right thing to do. And I was really surprised because things like your account number, a company can lose all of the account numbers and they don't have to share that with you at all. But at legal team, they had exactly what we were required to notify on, what we weren't. But they also didn't force us to do anything. We had input into all the processes, all the letters. I mean, it is us. We are the ones that are required to report. So they allowed us to be a co-op. They allowed us to kind of have our voice to talk to our members and employees in the way that we wanted, with empathy, obviously, for what had happened. But they helped us through the whole process. We were able to offer the credit monitoring. Not many people took us up on that. I mean, they told us that that would be the case. And part of that, unfortunately, I think is because there's so many breaches that's offered a lot.
So the original vendor whose system was compromised, were they helpful through the process? Were they forthcoming? Did they give you access when you needed it? Did they work with your legal team to get this sorted out?
Yeah, I would say they were. I think through the process, they had legal counsel as well. And that is another thing I learned is, had this been our direct event and we were the only people impacted, you do have to think about liability on both sides, right? Your vendor's liability themselves as well. And they don't want to report to you, just like I didn't want to report to members or employees before I was sure about something. They also don't want to do the same. So they ultimately had hired a forensic team, went through all the data, and actually provided us a report of everything that was in it. And they had meetings with us. We had discussions. I will say they did that in a timeline that worked for them because they wanted to be sure, and they had multiple people impacted. We took it upon ourselves to look at some things, and through that, we were able to actually respond a little quicker. It's not a negative on them. I think it was just they had to be sure, just like we did, but we only had to be sure of a smaller subset of what was there.
So talk a little bit about the lessons learned. I'm sure you had an incident response plan. Did it actually accommodate this sort of third-party breach, or is that something that you realized has to be added to the plan?
Yeah, we did have an incident response plan. We did not have this as a named specific incident, but of course, we still used our incident response plan, whether it was third party or not. I will say one of our lessons learned is there's a tendency to be a little more off the cuff or kind of make seat of the pants decisions when you're under stress. So one of our lessons was just to make sure that we're all following our plan. So things would come in and we would react to it. And I don't think we were always consulting our plan like we should have. That was one of our lessons. I think a big lesson for me is your data is your data. And I don't blame this third party at all, but there's no way they can care about our specific data as much as we care about our specific data. So I'm glad we took the onus to go out there and look and not wait for that report to come in. It helped us respond quicker. And I think it helped us to understand the situation a little faster. So glad we did that. And unfortunately, this is something that happens. And while we need to give it the proper priority it has, to not run around crazy, there's a pretty formulated process now for how this works. Obviously, you have the incident. You got to contain the incident first. Then you determine what kind of data is impacted. You open up your case with your insurance. They're going to walk you through the response. They're going to give you legal counsel. And so I think we never want this thing to happen, but I think what it showed us is that there's a step-by-step process to go through. And if you have a good insurance partner, they had a lot of resources and they helped reassure us and calm us down and make sure that we were doing the right things. And they kind of knew all the ins and outs, I guess. And as a co-op, it's not something you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, hopefully. And then I would say the other thing was to stay organized. As the incident got a little bigger, we obviously had to involve people on the member side of things, people on the human resources side of things, our accountants, many others. And I wish we were a little more organized throughout. Like we did a better job of just documenting everything. I think really that's a key lesson, to write down everything that happens, because as we had to produce certain things later on, and even as I presented on this topic and trying to come up with the presentation, I really had to go look in like 3 or 4 different places for the information. And so having a central place where you can put all of the things related to the incident is something that we'll definitely take into the future.
And I know you're working with the NRECA cyber goals. Is that something that's what you had done up until that point in the goals was helpful, and the goals that you're on the way to reaching, do you see those sort of in the context of this incident?
Yeah, I think the cyber goals are a great thing. As far as the goals and how they applied, I think obviously having the incident response plan, having things kind of locked down from that perspective really helped. But being that it was an incident that didn't originate on our systems, I think that, there's no benefit to an incident like this. But if there's anything you can look back on and say, is there something that we could gain? I think we gained the fact that, like, the first incident we really had to deal with didn't require us to go around our own networks trying to figure out everything. We could focus on one thing, the data, make it kind of a single issue incident. But I'm glad that we have the cyber goals and that we have additional ones coming out. We're through the level 1, working on the level 2. And I'm glad that we have that, because sharing data between co-ops, that's such a big thing. And I think we can inspire each other to better things. Having us work together to create goals that are a little stretchy for some things, but can help us kind of strive to be a little bit better than maybe we would have been if we just all went about it on our own. So I think that's the best part of the co-op goals, is to continue to inspire us. And I'm sure when we get through this level, there'll be another level, and it'll all really be in the name of helping us as cooperatives across the country be better as a whole, and not just individuals.
I hate that you and Blue Ridge had to go through this to get here, but I really appreciate the honesty and the full forthrightness you're willing to bring to this, because I think you're right. The co-op program is unique in the way it shares these kinds of situations and lessons learned, and it's critical for our success. So thanks so much for coming on and sharing it.
Yeah, I really appreciate being allowed to tell our story.
And thanks to you, our listeners, and to our sponsor, Champion Fiberglass. For more on this and other podcasts, visit us at electric.coop. Until next time, for Along Those Lines, I'm Scott Hoffman.
I'm Caroline Lee from Medina Electric Cooperative in Hondo, Texas. Thanks for listening to Along Those Lines. Subscribe and rate us on your favorite podcast app.